Hello viewers, thank you for joining me, and welcome to the spoiler-filled character discussion half of my review. I have been trying to keep my videos to a reasonable length lately, so I decided to make this its own video, as it's probably going to be another 17 minutes, if not longer. This is your last warning for spoilers before we get started. I restrained myself for the review portion. Nothing will be off limits here. On that note, I think I'll start at the very end. The one character I did talk about in detail during the first half was Light, so we won't linger on him too much here, past what's needed to talk about some of the other characters. Light's death at the end was satisfying in a way I kind of feel bad about. It's never the hope that you'll hate a character so much that you enjoy seeing them die a pitiful death. But by the time he finally gets taken down, 37 episodes in, it was just about damn time. But what I wanted to talk about wasn't really about Light. It was a little bit about Matsuda. His scene was definitely the most moving to me. That our blundering little rookie was the one to shoot him, listening to him scream about whether Light's grand plans were really worth betraying his own father. It was really great and emotional. Matsuda's introduced as this new detective who really looks up to Chief Yagami. Throughout, we see him deal with conflicting views on right and wrong more than any other character. He just feels young. I enjoyed seeing him grow over the course of the series, and it was so satisfying to see him get to be the hero at the end. And let's not forget to shout out Izawa, too. The older detective may not have ever doubted that Kira's methods were wrong, but he had a lot of other struggles. He was pretty much in the same position as Chief Yagami, working too many hours at a dangerous job. But he had a much younger daughter whose life he was missing. Izawa had a great little story about loyalty and how sometimes that conflicts with doing what's right, especially after Chief Yagami's death, and seeing how much he'd suffered in his last few years trying to prove his son's innocence. I have a lot of respect for his decision to betray Light to the organization that succeeded L. I'm sure it didn't feel great at the time, but a part of him knew it was the right thing to do, that taking down Kira was more important than personal loyalties. These two detectives, who started out the series feeling like they'd be minor background characters, really grew to be two of my favorites. But who I'd originally been planning to talk about first was Ryuk. The Shinigamis in general didn't play quite the role I'd wanted them to. It was so frustrating to see Rem ultimately play right into Light's hand. Ryuk was actually a favorite too. Despite his looks, he's like 99% comic relief. But this whole other death god realm and the rules that govern it didn't actually end up feeling that important. Ryuk's introductory scene with Light just casually throws in that he has a second death note, and I immediately took note of that, expecting it to come back in this wonderful, satisfyingly karmic way later. And it doesn't really. As promised, the series ends with Ryuk entering Light's name into his death note, but the manner in which it happens is kind of just a, oh well, I guess the game's over sort of way. I wanted a line or two about how Light's true downfall was his own ego, daring to see himself on the level of a god, some sort of life lesson to really rub it in. But I do have to admit that this may just be a selfish wish on my part. When they first meet, Ryuk does sort of mock Light when he thinks he was purposefully chosen. Ryuk tells him he dropped the note at random and Light was just who happened to pick it up, that the gods aren't nearly as interested in humans as humans tend to think they are. So the fact that Ryuk seems to have no opinion on human morality does fit. I was just hoping for a little more. I guess we'll stick to that topic of characters who weren't quite what I wanted them to be, and save the big ones for the end. I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but I was a big fan of Naruto growing up. I've realized recently that this has colored my perspective on certain things. At some point, I came to the conclusion that shonen anime, especially older ones, and respectable, well-written female characters just didn't mix. I've come to appreciate lately that this isn't necessarily the case. Unfortunately, Death Note was not one of the shows that proved me wrong. I could talk about Naomi, and how I was really hoping she'd be important for more than 2 episodes, or how Light's mom and sister deserved so much better, or about Kiyomi and how she seemed far too smart and competent for me to be satisfied with the writers turning her into just another mindless Light fangirl. But no, you probably could have guessed that this section is going to be about Misa. Misa Amane is a great example of everything you don't want to see in a show's most prominent female lead. She's introduced like she's going to be this great plot twist. Misa has a death note of her own, as well as a power even Light was not willing to make the sacrifice to obtain. In exchange for half the user's remaining lifespan, a Shinigami will enhance a human's eyes so they see people the way the death gods do. Just by looking at someone, you'll know their name and when they're destined to die. She is effectively more powerful than Light. She may not have had his level of intelligence, but she wasn't stupid or totally incompetent either. At least, not until the very end. She was always selfish and immature, but early Misa was capable of making plans, too, and putting enough thought into them that she likely wouldn't have been caught by the regular police. She always had flaws, but by the time the series gets to her interactions with Kiyomi, it felt like I was watching a literal child. I swear I could feel the writers wishing for Misa to just be killed off already. I'm honestly shocked she made it to the end, because Misa is in such a good position when she's first introduced, but any hopes I had for her crashed and burned nearly the second she met Light. Misa Amane is one of those characters whose entire character is quickly whittled down until there's nothing left to her but this crazy infatuation with her one-sided love interest. Misa was undoubtedly the most frustrating character to watch, apart from Light himself, and I have to admit that some of it is my own fault. Sometimes, when a character is just being introduced, I'll start brainstorming possible motivations or backstories for them. It's usually pretty harmless, but it can make for a rough time when it turns out to be preferable to what the series actually gives that character. Misa's introduction served another purpose. She reveals one possible way to kill a Shinigami. Rem may be her Shinigami partner, but Misa's death note actually used to belong to another death god. This one had been watching her from the Shinigami realm and fell in love. But Misa also had a human stalker who confronted her one night and was about to kill her, and then himself, when she rejected him, until her godly admirer intervened, writing the stalker's name in his death note. A Shinigami isn't allowed to use their notebook to extend a person's natural life. Misa was fated to die that day, so the Shinigami died instead. Which is all very sweet, but more importantly, it added the rest of his lifespan onto Misa's, which opened up a whole new realm of possibilities. They never specified just how long her life will be now, but there probably isn't a limit for a god. We could have been talking hundreds of years, and that really got me thinking. Misa's been a bit odd since day one. It made me wonder if maybe she'd already been alive for far longer than an ordinary human would be. Maybe she'd just stopped aging at some point and had no idea why until Rem showed up one day with the death note. Maybe, if she'd already had one foot on the supernatural side of things for so long without anyone who could possibly relate to her, it might explain a sudden, extreme attachment to Light, who was now also a part of this world. And then, of course, I was also hoping she'd reveal at some critical moment that being in love with him was a ploy all along and she had something else up her sleeve. But it wasn't to be. The backstory we're actually given is that Misa's parents were killed in a robbery. The robbers got away with it somehow through the official legal channels, but were later killed by Kira, who Misa now basically worships in appreciation. She flat out tells Light in their first meeting that she'll do anything to help him. She doesn't even care if he kills her at some point, just as long as he'll at least pretend to be in a happy relationship with her until then, and it just gets worse from there. There was so much potential for Misa that it hurts to think about it. So let's move on. We're on to the last big three, and I really don't have that much to say about one of them. Poor Mello, second best to the end. Not that I was ever terribly attached to him. The basics of L's two successors in training are pretty clear from the moment they're introduced. They may both be pretty intelligent, but Nier is the cold, logical one, and Mello the emotional, aggressive one. There were already so many meticulous planners in this show that you'd think someone prone to acting first and working out all the details later might be a nice change of pace, but to be honest, Mello just got on my nerves. He may have been the one instance where I was rooting for Light, because I just wanted to see someone take this kid down. And at last, we have L and Nier. I've probably mentioned before that L was one of my favorites. Not having a burning desire to take over the world can do wonders for a character, apparently, because the series loved to point out L and Light's similarities, but what stuck out the most to me were always their differences. I'm not saying L wasn't also willing to do some morally questionable things in his quest to catch Kira, but at the end of the day, he cared about the people around him. He may not have been the best at expressing those emotions, but the series gave us enough little moments to show they were there, and it helped that L was painfully straightforward. I'd say 99% of the time he meant exactly what he said, it just didn't always come out right. Those quirky genius types can be a lot of fun. I, of course, loved any time we got to see Light panic a bit because L had outsmarted him, and there was something kind of childlike about L too, which I also found endearing. So I dreaded reaching his death, which I did know was coming. It was one of the few spoilers I knew about Death Note going into it, and I'd heard about it in the context that a lot of fans were displeased with how things with L ended up. That fans didn't think the plan that outsmarted him was good enough to be what took down a genius like L, so I was kind of on guard to be disappointed. But you know what? Sad as I was to lose L, I wasn't too bothered by how we lost him. There's no doubt in my mind that L was smarter than Light, and I don't think his death diminishes that. They were playing the same game, but only Light knew all the rules. With that in mind, it's really a testament to L's genius, how well he was able to keep up and how often he got the upper hand. It was unfortunate, but not too surprising that Light eventually pulled ahead in a way L didn't have time to recover from. I had to appreciate something else in regards to L's death, though. This series did have mercy on us occasionally. With both L and Light's dad, I found myself kind of grateful, in hindsight, that they died when they did. Chief Yagami got to go out with what he thought was proof his son really wasn't Kira, and L, who'd come to view Light as his first real friend, was taken out before he had to confront that Kira really was Light, which I'm sure he did know, deep down. So finally, let's talk about Nier. I was a little endeared to him right off the bat too, if only because his mannerisms and quirks were very reminiscent of L. But as we got to know him better, it became apparent that Nier doesn't share those traits that I had deemed most important for L. Empathy, just caring about people in general, but especially his subordinates. L was really shaken up when they lost someone on the team. He was pretty affected when Chief Yagami had a natural heart attack from stress, too. On the other hand, there's a scene where, all but one of the agents working with Nier just start dropping dead around him, and he barely blinks. It doesn't warrant anything more than a, oh well, I guess Mello got the death note from him. In a way, maybe that's how it had to be. Nier pursued Kira with the same sort of cruelly detached passion that Light had in his quest to become a god. Maybe being equally ruthless was necessary to catch Kira. but I wouldn't be surprised if Nier being triumphant in the end also didn't go over too well with fans, because something about it doesn't feel quite right. That this kid, who has significantly more character flaws that are never really addressed, succeeded when L failed. I loved seeing Light finally lose, but it doesn't exactly feel like the pinnacle of storytelling that you want to see at the end of an epic, high-stakes tale. My ending thoughts on the matter are in a, I'm glad Nier won, but did he really earn the victory sort of space. So, here we are. Quite a bit later than projected, I know. Those few days turned into nearly another month. I should really just anticipate December getting away from me at this point. It has given me some extra time for reflection, though. There were some really interesting characters in this story, and honestly, I feel like a lot of them could have been utilized better. Quite a few times, someone new would be introduced, and they'd have a great setup for potentially twisting up the story, but then, just an episode or two later, some other circumstance or character flaw or something would be revealed so that they were no real threat to Light. Naomi may have only been relevant for like 3 episodes, but in that regard at least it felt like she put up a fight. I think it goes back to the complicated plans this story is famous for. I'm sure the writer had some sort of outline for the major plot points and how things were ultimately going to end up. I imagine every new character introduced was cause for stress in a way, because you want them to feel impactful, but they could potentially mess up your bigger plans for the story if you don't handicap them in some way, so they ended up restricted to their neat little boxes in the story. It doesn't feel great from the perspective of a viewer, but I feel like I kind of get it as a writer. That is officially everything I wanted to talk about that I didn't have time for in the review. I am ready to put this series to rest, and I'd love to know some of your thoughts on these characters if you've made it this far. Thank you for watching.